There were some great guys in that in the TF where I ended up. Wes Hall, Trevor Lane, Yanni Martin, who also came from the RLI. Super blokes, but the numbers dwindled. The strain of those call-ups was getting to guys. Marriages were breaking up. Um, Companies were folding. Blokes couldn't keep their businesses going, and it was very sad to see. But a lot of the blokes started leaving the country, and those deployments got well. There were just fewer and fewer of us white guys from the original, the original battalion, and so they brought in more and more RAR, who were great guys, but quite a few from the second battalion who were quite new, and it was quite difficult trying to get to know them and get to work with them when you've been used to working with a different type of soldier. That that you're on the same sort of level with in so many ways to working with black soldiers, and I enjoyed it, but I did find it quite challenging. The pressure increased. There were times where you missed. Fire Force was quite exciting and quite dangerous, but at least you had a lot of support, and you were with guys that you understood, and you knew you had support and everything. It got quite lonely out there in the TF battalion in 4RR, and I did a couple of follow-ups. One that sticks in my mind with from the Davuli Bridge was attacked, and we were deployed to do that follow-up. Black tracker by the name of Samora, who I'll never forget. He was a fantastic tracker and very aggressive. But I only had one other white guy with me, Derek Lane. And then I think there were 6 RAL guys. And hell, it was a long day. And we just followed this group got bigger and bigger, tracks. And the next thing, we got into a hell of a punch-up. And it was pretty terrifying. What had happened was we'd gone out of our operational area. We were outside of Thrasher and so I didn't have any maps. So when they said they would send a links from Chipinge to put in an airstrike to help us, he couldn't find us because I couldn't give him a log stat. So it was a long, pretty hairy day, and I still think we were quite lucky to get out of there, all of us alive, because if the enemy had been more aggressive, we managed to give them a bit of a fight with rifle grenades, but we'd run out of rifle grenades. But just those rifle grenades, I think, actually made a big difference that day. I think they thought we had mortars. And but yeah, long day. So it was very challenging out there. And then the times spent in the farming areas were also tough, but also sad, seeing what was happening to those poor farmers, and there just weren't enough of us to protect them. I do remember the one night we were on a deployment. I was with Mark Langerman, who was I'd been at school with, fantastic guy. He was a loot, and we were doing an OP, and it was nighttime, and we just heard these explosions, rockets, and then machine gun fire. And so we packed our kit, and it came over the radio that one of the farmers in Udzi had been attacked. It was quite a long way away from us. So we walked through the night to get there. It was a long, long walk. And we had a French journalist with us. I'll tell you about him just now. But he had been cleared to come on operations. And so he was with us from Paris. He was actually reporting for Paris Match then. I ended up in bloody Paris Match magazine for my sins. But we walked, and we got to this farmhouse, and then we waited till dawn, and their house had been attacked that night. That all survived, but there we were, sort of hunkered down outside, and out onto the front veranda comes Mrs. Hacking in her white dressing gown with a tray of tea and biscuits for us. Now, this is after a night of having your homestead shot to ribbons, absolute terror. And there, the first thing on her mind that morning was to come and bring us some tea. That was shame. And then she didn't. She was killed not that long after that when she hit a landmine, and that was Mrs. Rose Hacking. I went to see her grave the other day in Udzi. I went to have a look at all the graves there in at Udzi Anglican Church. I don't know if you remember it, but they're all there. John Barry, shame. And just a reminder of what happened. But then at that Chipinga area too. My God, we got the run around there. It was so tough being there because it rained so bloody often, and you probably remember, and in and out of those bloody mountains, trying to find your way around, and it wasn't an easy place to be deployed to.
So, Hannes, how did the war end for you?
John, it starts quite a funny story, actually. I was back home in Umtali, minding my own business. I was driving down Main Street, and I was going to the Whistle Stop pub at the Manika Hotel to meet my cousin Malcolm, who was farming in the Burn Valley. And those guys, they used to meet every Friday at the Whistle Stop, and it was a great place for drinking beer and talking rubbish. And I was driving down Main Street, and coming up was my friend Trevor Lane, I remember he was driving a white Alfa Romeo, and Trevor had recovered from his wounds. He'd been shot through both legs, and he was fully up and running. And Trevor saw me. I was in a Land Rover, and he waved me down, and I stopped and walked over and greetings. And Trevor said to me, "Listen, I've been sent to this Fuma Ravanu or something, and I'm not going on my own. So you better get your ass into gear, and you coming with me." And it was as simple as that. I went with Trevor. I didn't go to the pub. Went to the drill hall, drew my kit, my weapon and stuff, and that was that. The next thing, we headed out, and it ended up with, I think there were four of us. Pete Warren was a lieutenant, and a chap named Pete Porkita, blonde guy, Trevor, myself, and we had a chap named Robbie Russell, who was like he was the driver come admin guy. But there were only four of us white guys, and we ended up at, I think it was Mutambara Mission in Cashel, where we were to be based. So we were all acting sergeants, and Pete was a lieutenant, and then there were about 400 or 500 of these Fuma Ravanu guys. A few, the leadership, I think, was genuine ex-combatants from the other side, but most of them were poorly trained militia at best. They had G3s, and they weren't really they weren't soldiers. So it was quite an unruly mob when we arrived there, and a little bit terrifying because there were only four of us. And I just thought to myself, Jesus, if this lot get upset with us, we're not in a very good place to be. But we quite quickly got to know their leadership, and they got to know us. There were barriers that needed to be broken down, so that to build a bit of trust. But then I tell you, it started to work, John. And I know this whole Fuma Ravanu thing is quite controversial. But what I saw when those guys got going, you see, us white guys never really understood that. Well, I certainly didn't understand the dynamics of what goes on in the communal areas, because I didn't speak the language, and I didn't understand their customs well enough. So I wasn't tuned in. I mean, some guys were, but I wasn't one of them. But these blokes, some of them were from the area, and so it turned out that they were gathering excellent intelligence. Initially, I was a bit skeptical, but then we started looking into things, and sure enough, when they were finding the enemy, and it reached the point where, jeepers, we were in and out of punch-ups on a very regular basis. And it was frustrating because at that point, if we'd had a committed fire force to react to that intelligence, I'll tell you, it would have been a big success. But everybody was so overstretched at that time. We were having to try and deal with things ourselves on the ground. I mean, we got quite good at using bloody 2-inch mortars and stuff, trying to put down our own bloody support fire, and to try and get these guys to attack and in a sort of sensible way. It was pretty fascinating stuff, and it really was working. I had in fact, when I look back, it was actually the day of the ceasefire, and I heard on the radio that morning that Governor Soames had arrived in the country now. That fat fool from England who'd come in now. He was actually effectively the administrator of the country. And on that day, we had a big run-in, and as always, there were a lot of these guys, but just trying to keep control of everybody. But the Fumaravana guy next to me, either his weapon had jammed or he'd run out of ammo. I don't know, but he was screaming because he didn't have a weapon. And I saw this, what I thought was a dead insurgent, just a little way ahead, and he was dead still. And I thought, geez, I'll go and grab his AK and grab his ammo and stuff, and I'll give it to this guy. So I ran forward, I got to this guy, and he was still alive. And the next thing, I was in hand-to-hand combat with this guy, but he wasn't in a very good way. And so I managed to get his weapon off him and get back, and he was lying there groaning, and we carried on. But anyway, at the end of it, he was still alive. We managed to capture him, and that's another story. But that was actually my last. That was my last engagement, and then the next thing we were told, pull back. And I remember, I forget the guy's name, but the bloke in charge of that Fumaravana outfit, he was an impressive bloke, and he was upset when we had told him, we've got our orders, but it was not to be. The die was cast, and as you know, the rest pretty much history. One disappointment after another. But I don't know, John. So many thoughts about it all, but I'm pleased I was part of trying. I wish I'd tried harder, quite frankly. But we did try, and it just didn't go our way, I suppose.
Yeah. Hannes, how did you kind of reorientate yourself after all of that? I suppose you'd been demobilized, or you left the army. Were you officially demobilized, or?
Yeah, like everybody. It was it was just thanks for coming, wasn't it? And and then the disappointment of the election. That was a huge disappointment. So yeah, I thought, well, I better give this law thing a crack. There was still a white attorney general then. Keep forgetting his name. What a wonderful bloke he was. So I joined the Attorney General's office as I was a prosecutor.
Not Sir Hugh Beadle or
no, he was the Chief Justice.
Justice Davies?
No, he was they were all judges. Okay. He was the Attorney General. Wonderful bloke. And so I was in the Attorney General's office as a prosecutor. I started off in Salisbury for a few months, and then I was, for some, they must have been really short because I was promoted quite quickly, and the next thing I was made the senior prosecutor in Manicaland in Umtali. So there I was back in my hometown as the new sheriff in town, senior prosecutor. I don't think I was terribly effective. I remember letting off a couple of our mates who got hauled in for tax evasion or something. I found a way to let them off. I did help some of my chums, I've got to say, but only in a small way. It was tough, and then I ended up we're going off topic now, but there was an incident on a bus with a bodyguard who had got drunk, and he was on this bus, and the conductor, in those days, this was early 80s, they still ran things properly. So the conductor came to him for his bus fare, and this guy just pulled his bloody tocker off and said, "You can go and get stuffed. All you're going to get from me is a bullet between the eyes. I don't pay bus fares." So this poor bus conductor goes and reports it, and indeed the police investigate, and they arrest the bodyguard and put him in the cells. He's drunk that night. In the morning, he's sober and full of nonsense when I arrive at the courts. So I look at this docket, and I think, geez, this could be armed robbery. I mean, this guy can do 10 years for this. He's using a weapon not to pay a bus fare. So that's what I charged him with. Well, it quickly became political because he was the bodyguard to a very, very senior Zani politician who's still around. I'd prefer not to name. And he then got involved and said, "Hey, this is ridiculous. He was drunk. He wasn't going to kill anyone, blah, blah, blah." They then got hold of me, and I got these visitations. And I kept saying to them, "Look, it's not my decision. I'm a prosecutor. I take orders from the Attorney General." And they said, "No, but you must take orders from us. We are the power, and this is the Minister of Security," or whatever it was, who he was bodyguard to. And I said, "Well, it doesn't work that way. I don't care what your minister says. If the Attorney General tells me to drop the charges, I'll drop them, but not until he tells me to." So eventually, the AG gets hold of me. Bless him. I wish I could remember his name. And he says, "Hey, this is big stuff. We're into the big league here. I think armed robbery is a bit too heavy-handed, but prosecute him under the Law and Order Maintenance Act for carrying his weapon illegally because he was off duty. So he shouldn't have had his 9mm with him." So I said, "Okay, that's fine. That's what I'll do." And that's still quite a serious offense. So that's what I was doing when I come to work and my office has been broken into. And these guys have got in there and they've taken the bloody docket. So I looked at this, and it's no big deal because take the docket. So I went straight across to the police, and he's dead now. But it was Assistant Commissioner Kars, I think, who was the provincial commissioner then in Italia. And I went to him and to ask him to just go and get that bus conductor and put the docket back together again, because I was pressing ahead with this prosecution. And I went to see him, and he said, "Oh, I've heard enough about this thing. And as far as we're concerned, it's done. We're not, as far as the police are concerned, we're not following up on this." And that was actually a sort of a signal moment for me. I realized then, I thought, if this is an assistant commissioner, if this guy's not going to be prosecuted, then I think the rule of law is done and dusted in this country, and it's not for me. I'm just going to get into trouble here, and I'm probably not going to make much of a difference. And that's when I resigned, and I didn't really know what to do, and I was missing the excitement, I suppose. And that's when I got hold of Trevor Lane. And I said, "Trevor, listen, I'm bloody unemployed, man. I don't know what the hell to do." So he said, "Get your ass down here." And he was down in Madabiland with forestry. He was running the forestry wildlife concessions areas, and he was the wildlife manager. And so Trevor said to me, "Come down here. We're starting a safari company, and we're doing all this wildlife stuff. It was all very exciting. And I'll make you the assistant manager, so you can be my assistant." So that's how it all happened. I went off, and I thought, geez, I hadn't really thought about this sort of thing, but I thought I'd do it for a couple of years. But I was so enjoyed it. Looking back, John, we were lucky, man. Lots of exciting times, and again, I met great guys in the hunting and wildlife fraternity, the national parks guys, Klemkutsi, Gomez, Adams, all those buggers. We all worked together, and wonderful blokes. And it was a great life again. I slowly got into the safari hunting, and then Zambia opened up, and I was one of the early guys to go from Zim up to Zambia. There were 4 of us went up. Bloodnut, the late Bloodnut Curtis, Chunky Bucas, Andy Wilkinson, PJ Fouché, myself. And we weren't very well received, not by the black Zambians, but the white Zambians weren't happy to see us Zimbos pitch up in Zambia. I tell you, we didn't get a very good reception there. They were pissed off about a lot of things. And I don't blame them. You know, the war had actually made life quite tough for the whites up in Zambia. A lot of those blokes had big problems because it was a white population and they were targeted. So they all had stories to tell, and they didn't have much to thank us for the war. But I was in Zambia for 8 or 9 years, and I had a wonderful time. I hunted all over the country, and what a wonderful country it is. So I still got very fond memories. And then it was Paddy Curtis, or Bloodnut, bless him, who went to Tanzania, and then he said to me, "Come up and have a look here." And it was another adventure. So off I went, and we hunted together in the Selous and up in the Masailand. And then I was in the Masailand when I got hammered by the buffalo. that put me out of action for a while. So yeah, it's been very, very interesting. I'm lucky.
And how did you get into writing books?
Yeah, you know, when we left Zim, it's 20 years ago now, left reluctantly, but we were under pressure there on our small holding outside Harare, where everybody was getting hammered, and it just wasn't safe anymore. And we just had our second child, and it was a tough one, but really needed to get somewhere more secure. And I was very lucky, got a South African passport through my dad, and we were able to move to South Africa. So we came to Darling, and I didn't have anything, you know, one of the reasons we came to Darling was I didn't have a job, any clue really what I was going to do. I still had interests up in Zambia because I bought land there, but a long way from home. So I really needed to refocus. I always wanted to write, and I felt I had quite a lot to write about, not about myself, but about people that I'd met along the way. And so I started writing, and I did a book of short stories really about some of the characters and personalities that I'd met. And I got a publisher for that in the United States. And so I got published quite early on. I always wanted to write about our history and the war and stuff. And that was tough for getting a breakthrough to get a book published. That's another long story. I mean, I could write a book about writing books about what I wrote about. It's quite a long saga, but eventually I got a breakthrough thanks to Al Fenter, really. He got me published by Casemate, and that's how I got my first sort of military history book published, and that did handful of hard men did well. But you know, when you go through an overseas publisher, you don't get an awful lot out of it. So from a monetary point of view, not terribly rewarding, but it's something I'm pleased I did, and I'm still doing. And I did 3 books on the SAS. I did a biography of PK Vallabhau. I'm redoing my short stories on the hunters and interesting personalities that I met over the years, and I need to try and get that out sometime soon. And John, I've just done a book with Mike West.
Tell us about that.
Fantastic story, Jeepers. You know, I say to people, if you're a writer, I'm lucky to be where I am because I've had exposure to such interesting people and such interesting events. And Mike's life is really an extraordinary one. And as a soldier story, it's a bit like the Darrell Watt story. It is extremely hard to beat. I don't know where in the modern world you find soldiers who have been through and done what these guys have done. I mean, Mike was in the real thick of it for the hardest time in the Rhodesian War, and then right through the whole South African war right up until 1989 when it ended. He was in the thick of it in the recce's, and he was used and used and used. He was extremely effective. And I'm lucky, thanks to Mike, I think we managed to capture his story, and I'm hoping that'll be out in about a month or two. It's just about ready to go. It's a remarkable soldier story.
Hannes, thank you so much, man. Found it really interesting, and I really appreciate it. It's been difficult to pin you down, but I'm glad I managed to do that.
Okay, well, thanks. I do feel a bit bloody embarrassed talking about myself, you know.
Do you have any thoughts in closing on the future of the Fighting Men of Rhodesia series? There's still a lot of personalities that we haven't interviewed, but do you feel like at some point we're going to scrape the bottom of the barrel, or is there still lots more to come?
You know, John, I think so. You know, there are only so many of us left, but I think we've got a way to go. I think there's still some very interesting guys out there that we need to talk to. But where I think it's a bottomless pit is if we start talking about Rhodesian stories and Zimbabwe stories. You know, there are just so many of them across the spectrum, from, you know, from farming to wildlife to hunting, fortunes made, fortunes lost, ups, downs, so many interesting people and so many interesting events. You know, I don't think there's another country on the planet that has packed as much history into such short a space of time, if you think about it.
Yeah.
And what's happened in that country in so short a space of time, I don't know where else that has happened. So I think we've got a hell of a lot to work with over the months and years ahead. But I would like to do more on just people and places and events outside the military. There's a surfeit of stories out there which we need to tap into.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We still haven't managed to get too many farmers' wives and things like that, you know.
No, I think we've got to keep trying on that one, John. There are some out there, and my God, that story needs to be told. Those people, wow, they were on a different level to us, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just, you know, what they went through, the solitude that they had to deal with, the exposure, trying to keep those farms going on their own.
Yeah,
incredible. That story needs to be told.
Yeah. Hannes, just the last thought. I had a couple of thoughts. One, I just wanted to say that I think it was a day or so ago, our fundraising initiative to upgrade our computer equipment came to an end, and we had one final donation that made us hit our target. I know I need to put some work into it from my side of the contribution, but you are thinking of making a broadcast quality movie about the Rhodesian War. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that? Because I know we do have a rough first draft of a script.
Yeah, look, as you know, this is Duncan Clark's initiative. Duncan, who wrote Rhodes Ghost and Last Rhodesians, among with several other books. Duncan, absolutely brilliant. I mean, I feel completely out of my depth in his company too. But yeah, it's Duncan who's been watching these talks, and he's very much of the opinion that we've got a lot of material here that we could use in a documentary to put together a documentary film on the history with archive footage and stuff. And yes, I've been working with him. I'm a little bit out of my depth here because I've never done this sort of thing before. Duncan has, because they did a documentary on the oil industry, I think. So he's done this type of thing. So he knows the formulas and the procedures to follow in putting this type of script together. I'm learning as we go along, but we have made some progress. And actually, the more I get into it, the more it makes sense to me, and the more I'd like to do it. I don't know if this will have any financial appeal, whether it's something of any value to anyone. But my God, if you got it right, I don't think people, I look at what they make movies about these days, and I think to myself, jeepers creepers, who's interested in this? I can tell you some stories that you can make some movies about, but I don't know, we're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. It doesn't resonate. But when you look at at the story of what happened in this country, it really is extraordinary, and it's something that we need to plug away at, John. It's just finding the time, but I think it would have considerable appeal. As I say, whether it translates into anything that we can monetize, I've got my doubts. I don't know, but I mean, I would love to do it just for the sake of history. It's just finding the time, and I have got quite a lot else on my plate at the moment, so I can't afford to spend too much time away from feeding my family, as it were.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a good plan. We should try and pursue it.
Yeah. Hannes, thank you so much for your time, brother. And
all right, Johnny, I better get on with my day.
All right. Appreciate it.
I'll leave it with you.
All right. Thank you very much, my friend. Okay.
Cheers, John.